being this Thursday to being next Thursday. So your new, or rather your collage number 3 is going to be due the 10th now. So you do have an extra week to work on it. Hopefully you've gone down to the special collections by now. If you have not, I heavily encourage you to do so, especially if you find that you can't find a lot of stuff on your building. You'll probably find a lot more down there. I paid a visit to the Mob Museum this weekend. Lots of good information out there, especially if you chose a casino on the Strip or if you chose an older property on Fremont. There's some stuff down there. I would encourage you to go visit that as well. Does anyone have any questions regarding the collage before we start?
You said there's a place that we can go to help with our collages. What is it again?
So if you need help with your collages, you can go out to the New Architectural Studios office, or the acronym is NASCO, NASCO. It's actually the owner's name. His name is NASCO, and then he called the company New Architectural Services Co. But they're located in the art store, so just take a good chunk of your materials, a written, work in progress of your manifesto, and they'll be happy to help you anywhere between now and the 10th when it's due, past 5 p.m. just because they're working for that. Yeah. All the information is on the actual assignment itself, so if you need the address, it's all up on there. Or if you've been to First Friday, it's in the same spots. All right. So today we're going to continue. Last time we left off in the 1960s. We talked about the Pop City era where we had Circus Circus, Jay Sarno, and all of this, masses over the classes approach. And today we're going to go down a different route into what we call the corporate modern era. So in the 1970s, the United States largely got a little bit more conservative, and that goes for the culture as a whole as well as for the business side of things. So the 60s were the era of revolution. We had the civil rights movement, lots of big changes in the 60s. And the 70s are going to react to that in a number of different ways, which we'll see. But the story here in Vegas, as far as corporate modern goes, really begins with Howard Hughes, which is a name you should all be familiar with since it's plastered pretty much all over the city. Or if you live in Summerlin, that is all owned by Hughes Corporation. So Howard Hughes was a bit of a national hero at this point. He does produce a lot of the major Hollywood movies, so he is well known for that. And then he is also an aviator. He also helped produce a lot of materials for the war efforts. So people see him as a symbol of America. He is a patriot. And of course, he's very handsome. So he's kind of this all-in-one all-American figure. Now, unfortunately, Howard Hughes, by the time he gets to Las Vegas, is not doing all that well. Do you have a question? Oh, okay. By the time he gets to Vegas, he's not doing all that well because he has had a lot of accidents flying on the plane. He does end up with a lot of broken bones in his body. He does become addicted to opioids, and then he also has deformities in his face. So he decides to become a recluse. He also has a lot of sensory issues and develops OCD. So when he gets to Vegas, there's Harvey's accident. He looks like this, according to the urban legend, because no one really actually got to see him. We don't have photographs of him. This is really just a depiction based on a movie. We do know that he kept his feet in tissue boxes because of his sensory issues. If he had to touch any doorknob, any surface, he would have to do it with tissue. But the reason he came to Vegas was because he said he was sick and tired of being a small fish in the big pond of Southern California. He was ready to be the big fish in the very tiny pond of Las Vegas. So he's coming here with a purpose, and that is to pretty much become the biggest businessman in Vegas. He's also the wealthiest man in the world at this time, so he has all the money in order to make this happen. Now, when he first gets here, he is snuck into Wilbur Clark, aka Mo Dalitz's Desert Inn, and he takes over the entirety of the 9th floor, not because he wants to flaunt his money, but because he's also a germaphobe. So he doesn't want anyone in there breathing the same air. He kind of shuts all the windows, puts the blinds out, and he is snuck in by his Mormon crew. I haven't really talked about the Mormons since the Mormon forts, but they have had a pretty big role in Vegas since. A lot of the major casino owners do like to hire Mormons as their casino managers. Does anyone want to guess why?
Because they're Mormon?
they can't gamble, and they're they tend to be very honest. So it's a pretty good deal to hire someone that is Mormon. That is a common trend. Bugsy Siegel, Mo Dalitz, Jay Sarno, all of them like to hire Mormons to run their casinos because they know it's going to be an honest practice and they're not going to be skimming money on the side. And in the same way that the casino managers tend to work with Mormons, so does what's his name? Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes hires them because they are very loyal and they kind of just do whatever he says. He communicates with them over the phone and they run his business, no questions asked. Now Mo Dalitz and Wilbur Clark realize that by having the entire 9th floor occupied, yes, they are paying the rooms hotel fees, but they're not necessarily going down there to gamble, versus had you kept that entire floor open, then you'd be able to have people come down, game, and spend money on the actual casino floor. And so they decide to ask Howard Hughes and his crew to leave. Howard Hughes does not want to leave, and instead he offers them a really good deal that they can't refuse, and he says, how about I just buy it off of you for $13.2 million? By this point, Mo Dalitz, remember, he is the head of the Cleveland mob. He goes, fine, he's ready to retire. He doesn't want to be shot in his own casino. And so he goes, sure, here you go. And now Howard Hughes is part of the Las Vegas Strip. There's the actual publication where he purchases it, $13.2 million. And Howard Hughes has big plans for Las Vegas. He does not like what he sees in the 60s, which is a very more, trashy, massive approach to Vegas. And he thinks that this place should not be allowed to deteriorate any further. He compares it to Coney Island, which at this point is sort of becoming a rundown carnival area in New York City. He doesn't want Vegas to be that. He wants it to be a classy city. He begins acquiring more properties on the Strip, so all of these eventually become his. The Sands, the Frontier, Castaways, El Rancho, all of the original properties. On the Circus, which he is not able to purchase, he does say the Strip is supposed to be synonymous with a very good-looking female dressed up in expensive diamond-studded evening gowns and driving in a Rolls Royce. So he doesn't really agree with what Circus is doing, which, remember, they have the animals on the floor. It's a very middle-class approach, and Howard Hughes doesn't like that lifestyle. So he says we need to clean up Las Vegas, make it more classy in general. Now, he doesn't just purchase on the Strip, he does also purchase a lot of land, especially out here in the West. Everything that is crosshatched is Howard Hughes's, so anyone that lives on that westernmost part of the city, what is that called today? Yes, it is Summerlin. So he does acquire this. He has ideas for a community. He doesn't actually oversee that community because by that time he decides to leave Las Vegas. But he named it after his maternal grandmother, Jean Amelia Summerlin. So that is where the name comes from. But he also acquires these areas in the yellow, which you'll notice are where our airports are. So because he is an aviator, he does have an interest in that industry. He purchases what is today the Hughes Airport up by Rancho. And then he also purchases what at this point is the old McCarran Airport. Later it's revived and made into the main airport for Vegas. So he acquires all of these major areas, and then of course he starts purchasing most of the Strip by this point. Now, unfortunately, when he tries to go by the Stardust, he is told that he cannot do that because the state is trying to prevent a monopoly from forming. So the problem with monopolies, most of you know, is once you have one, you don't really have a lot of competition, right? You kind of become complacent because you're the only person in the business. And so in order to keep Vegas running, you do need to have multiple people owning different properties. And Howard Hughes, as you can see, the language they use in here is monopoly, antitrust. They do not allow him to purchase the Stardust for this reason. And he becomes quite resentful. He doesn't like the fact that they told him no, and so what he does is he goes, well, if I can't purchase anything, I'm not going to allow anyone to do anything unless it's me. So he purchases all the empty land on the Strip so that no one else can do any new developments. And because he owns half of the other properties already, he's trying to pretty much block anyone from coming in and purchasing all the other remaining ones, from becoming his own competitor. Now the problem with that is, that's exactly what happens. So Kirk Kerkorian, a name that should be quite familiar to you all, his name does appear a lot all over UNLV because he did have several donations to the university and he's an important businessman in Vegas. Kirk Kirk Kerkorian comes over and he starts purchasing little by little a bit of each of the properties that Howard Hughes cannot get his hands on, including the Flamingo. Kerkorian, like Hughes, also begins as an aviator, so there's also this like ego thing going on where they're kind of the same sort of symbol in the United States. Kerkorian does make most of his money making huge trips across the Atlantic, around $300,000 per trip, and eventually he becomes a private jet owner, so he jets people into Vegas, and that's how he starts to get involved, and he starts getting ideas about investing into casinos. He purchases the Dunes, the Caesar's Palace, or shares in Caesar's Palace. And then he also completely buys out the Flamingo. So you can see everything Hughes is not doing, Kerkorian is doing. So now we have these two major players, one of them being very heavily corporate. Kerkorian is associated with the Hilton Corporation, and the other one is not. And so we're gonna see that in this next development, we're gonna see the battle between the corporation and then honestly someone that's not really corporate, but is kind of just a monopoly. So because Howard Hughes has purchased all the land on the Strip, and all the other land has already been developed, Kerkorian buys this plot of land back here, which you should all recognize as the Westgate today. And he decides that he's going to build the most expensive resort in the world to date, which is going to be $60 million. So Hughes decides that he's going to scare off Kerkorian, and he goes through three different ploys. So number one, he says that because he's already bought the sands, he's going to expand it, and now it's going to become a $100 million property. And he's hoping that Kerkorian is going to go, well, I can't do 60 million because he's going to outdo me with 100 million, so there's no point. I'm not going to do it anymore. But it didn't really work. And so Howard Hughes has to come up with another plan to run out Kirk. So his second plan, he says, well, they're starting to do a lot of nuclear testing out there, so the ground's going to be very unstable, especially if you're planning to do a tower. And that didn't work because Kerkorian had already had his soils guys, he had his geotechnical engineer out there, and he knew it was perfectly fine to be building out there. So that didn't work. So Howard Hughes has to get even more creative to find a way to deter Kerkorian. So what he does is the pettiest thing he could possibly do. He purchases the area right across from the Westgate. Notice that it is off strip, right? He owns all of this on the white line. He purchases the one little piece out here that he does not own already, and he proposes he's going to develop it and make it the landmark in order to be the direct competition to the Hilton International right across the street. And so we start the battle between the two of them, the race to the finish line. Kerkorian announces he's going to open on set date. Howard Hughes announces he's also going to open on set date. So there's the construction. You can see the Hilton International is being constructed back here. This is the tower for the landmark. And when you look at the architecture of the two, you can really see the difference that's starting to form. It's more than just a business ploy, it's also a larger architectural difference that's going to happen in the city. On the one hand, we have this like boogie-ish saucer dome style landmark tower. On the other hand, we have a more international modernist approach to architecture, something more standard, which is what corporations are. So we're starting to see the standardization of architecture take place. Now the landmark itself isn't really all that successful architecturally because the hotel rooms are all inside of this stem back here. And so the rooms are going to be wedge-shaped, they're going to be quite small, and because a lot of it does have to remain solid to be structural, you're not going to get a lot of great views. The restaurants are up here, but really this place has no room for expansion. The only area would be down here, where it honestly looks more like a motel. So it doesn't really look all that classy, despite Howard Hughes wanting to portray it that way. Here's the original plans. I do want you to keep this name in mind. Martin Stern is the architect of the era. He does help Howard Hughes with the Landmark Hotel. So you can see the shape of the rooms over here and the way things are arranged. It's not the most functional floor plan. And then we have the International, and you'll notice Martin Stern is also involved in that. So he's playing for both the enemies at this point. But the International, you'll notice, begins to take on more of that classic Y shape. The purpose of the Y is to have as many rooms as possible with as many views out into the peripheries without looking at another room. So you can't really see your next door neighbors from any one of these wings. We also see the development of the tower and the podium concept. So you'll notice in the dashed lines is the actual tower portion, and then the rest of the ground floor, second, third floor casino areas are gonna be the entirety of the pink. That is how most of our properties are built today. And so Kerkorian begins the idea of the all-in-one. Not just the all-inclusive resort, but literally all-in-one building. You do not have to go outside anywhere to access any of the services available to guests at the Hilton International. So there's Kerkorian, right? Kerkorian's actually a very friendly guy. If you screw him over in business, that does not mean you can't be friends in their personal lives. So Kerkorian isn't really paying attention to Hughes at all. Hughes, meanwhile, is all up in his head. Again, he does develop OCD, so he does have a lot of anxiety. When it comes to the opening of the landmark, he can't make up his mind on the menu for the opening. He doesn't send out invitations for the landmark until the day before. So by the time that Kerkorian's International opens, and you can see the types of celebrities that he brings in, he also brings in Elvis Presley, Howard Hughes' opening is a massive failure. Hardly anyone shows up. And because of the way that the architecture looks, the people that can actually come to Vegas, they don't want to be staying there. They want to be staying at the International, the nice, modernist glass front building. Bless you. So just so you can see the size comparison, here's the Stratosphere today. There's the landmark. You can see it really wasn't all that tall. It is a sort of predecessor to the Stratosphere though. But when you compare this to the Hilton International, now the Westgate, you can really see that difference in architectural thinking. One of them is that sleek modernist approach. And what you'll notice is we have the long facades be populated with fenestrations, the short facades are left blank. It is up on pilotis, it is a sort of tower in a park idea. So we're seeing that Martin Stern is very directly borrowing from Corbu. So we know that he has modernist architectural training. He is a fully trained architect, and because of that, his idea on what Vegas should be is going to be very different from what Vegas has been in the 60s. He does not tolerate the disrespect of the sign people trying to be the big stars of the show. He helps reset the hierarchy so that now the architect is back at the top of all that and the sign is all the way at the bottom. So we'll see signs from local great in the 70s. So in these next couple of casinos, I do want you to pay attention to both the form of the building, look at the thematic elements, pay attention to signs, and also the port cochères, which is where the cars come into the properties, because we're going to begin to see a lot of patterns. So this is the Marina Hotel. You'll notice that like Kerkorian's building, all of the fenestrations are on the long facade, blank shorter facade, and notice that there isn't really a lot of thematic elements going on here. The few places where we do have them are on the port cochere, and then a little bit towards the top of the actual tower. The sign itself is quite boring, and we start to see a lot more letterboards instead of neon. This is the Holiday Inn, which today is Harrah's. You'll notice that the tower itself is also quite boring, blank facade, and in order to bring in a little bit of a thematic element, they do dress up the front to look like a boat. So if you have ever been to Harrah's, you will notice that the front of it looks a little bit funny. So there's the original hotel tower, and then notice how this kind of looks like a boat. That's because it used to be an actual boat right there. Then we have Barbary Coast. This one honestly hasn't really changed. It's gone through so many name changes, but it looks the same. Barbary Coast is the same concept. All of the windows on the long facade, blank short facade. They do add a little bit out on the front here, but it doesn't even have a major sign. We just kind of put the letters on the building. Barbary Coast is today the Cromwell, Bills. It's, like I said, it's gone through a lot of different names, but you can still see it has that big bullnose coming out right here, which is the same one that they used in the original Barbary Coast. Imperial Palace opens around this time as well. Imperial Palace is the same exact thing. If you take away the little rooftop elements, it is just another glass tower. The front of house is just a big warehouse. Those are not real windows, they're just painted on, and they try to make it look like it's a Japanese theme, but you can really tell it's just a warehouse and then a tower in the back. But because they realize that they can't all compete if they're glass boxes, they do have to bring in a little bit that differentiates them, but just minimally. The building, ultimately, according to Stern and the architects of the 70s, is what should speak. And it's, in my opinion, not doing a whole lot of speaking, right? Now notice the sign is really quite modest compared to the 60s. It doesn't have as much neon, it's not as flashy, and it's letterboard that's beginning to take that prominence. The Imperial Palace today is the Link. If you've ever been to the Link area and you've seen that big building with a blank facade right here, that is the remnants of the old Imperial Palace, and then those were its old hotel towers. Now notice how close this is to the street front, like it's literally right on the sidewalk. If you look back at the older pictures, you'll notice that the road is all the way out here, but that the road today starts right there. So that's because Las Vegas Boulevard did go through a major lane expansion to have the median. Also, as we just begin to have more traffic, we just add more lanes on either side. So they did acquire a bit of the land in front of there to widen the boulevard. Flamingo also goes through a redesign. Remember, Krikorian is the one that purchases it. So when Bugsy Siegel and the mob has it, it looks like this. It is a big Sunbelt modern open complex. The pool is in the center. It creates this beautiful semi-oasis. After Krikorian comes in, they do begin to build towers all the way around it, and that is where we get the standard Flamingo that we all know today. And I want you to notice the move that Martin Stern pulls up here. Rather than changing the architecture of the top rooms, all he does is create a little bit of a cantilever on those upper floors. So now the suites are just as wide as the regular hotel bays. The bathrooms are in the same areas. You just have a little bit more space up in the front. And it's a bit of an overhanging glass element to give it that sense of luxury. But he does add 6 towers all the way around, and so you'll notice now if you go out to the Flamingo is the pools are constantly shaded. And it goes to show that during the corporate era, there really isn't a whole lot of regard for the guest experience, right? They block off the pool, the Flamingos entirely, and it's really just about profits. Now Howard Hughes, upset with everything Krikorian is doing, and by the fact that his landmark is a failure, decides to permanently leave Las Vegas, and so all we have left is the Hughes Corporation today. So Krikorian ultimately wins this battle, and once again, it's not just Krikorian as a person, it is what he represents, the era of the corporation and the glass modernist skyscraper. At this point, he does purchase MGM, which is a failing company of sorts. They've produced a lot of the major films, but they simply don't have the same reputation. They're kind of run down by this point. But Krikorian understands that just having MGM under his belt gives him a bit of a household name. And he says, with the capital I have, I can easily bring back the company and make it as luxurious as it once was. And so he proposes a casino that is themed after the idea of movie stars. And that is going to become known as the MGM Grand. This is not the MGM Grand that we have today. This is where Bally's or the Horseshoe or whatever it's being called today is. We'll talk about why that is in a second. But notice that Martin Stern, once again, is the architect, pulls the same exact move he does at the Flamingo at the new MGM Grand, just making those upper floors cantilever a bit to have larger suites. As it's being constructed, interestingly, the architect is downstairs drafting still. So Krikorian wants this to be an express construction. He orders all the materials before the architect can have a finalized plan. So Martin Stern and his team are down there drafting against time. As they're building one tower, they are still designing the second tower. So it's really not the best design practice, as you can imagine. And because of that, the tower itself actually doesn't have any sprinklers, which we'll see becomes a major problem in the 1980s. Now the sign for it, you'll notice, is very boring, right? It's just a big letterboard with 3 letters, MGM. There's no neon on it, there is no flashy element to it. Yesco, the company that makes all of these signs, does propose to them a really beautiful and elaborate signage. Martin Stern, the architect, turns it down. So we're seeing that the tables are turning, and again, the architect is now at the top of the food chain, and he's able to reject the sign makers and designers, and he's able to tell them, I don't want that because my building is the billboard. The building is what people are going to recognize, not your sign, which is a very architect thing to say. This is what the building, the render of the building ends up looking like. But when it's actually opened, people say it looks like a prison up on top and a bunker on the bottom, since there's no windows and it's all made out of concrete. So it's really not all that successful. However, Krikorian finds a way to bring in the luxury. On the porte cochere, it is the biggest one to date. He does add light bulbs, so we get this movie star experience, red carpets as people are coming in. You can see the type of propaganda that they have going on. We now give you Las Vegas from the company that made the Roman Empire, the Civil War, blah, 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 all of the movies that they've made, so that people can experience that at this hotel. There it is, once it's constructed. Now, you guys can answer this in your heads. I personally do not think that the building alone is the logo of the casino itself. It honestly looks just like the Flamingo. It looks like every other one that we've been looking at up until now. So it goes to show the importance of signage, of branding, of thematic elements that the 70s is really missing out on. And this reflects the larger trend that's going on in the United States. Remember I told you, a strip isn't just, the Las Vegas Strip, it's also a representation of the rest of America at each respective point in time. Left image is New York City, right image is Chicago. You can't even tell them apart. It is the same type of corporate structure that's being copied and pasted all over the country. By this point, we are having urban decay. The factories have pulled out. There is a ton of urban blight. Everyone has moved out of the city, or at least everyone that can has moved out to the suburbs. And so the corporations can now come in and buy land for cheap, develop ugly designs that really don't do anything for the user. Once that corporation decides they don't want to be there anymore, they can just abandon the building and start all over somewhere else. And so this is what Robert Vittori and Denise Scott Brown are fighting against. The idea that modernism at this point has become bastardized, and it no longer stands for what it originally did. We also have another problem. In 1973, we do have the oil embargo, and so because of this, we are running low on gas and energy. And so Las Vegas does have a blackout for 5 months on purpose. They do turn off all their neon so that they're looking a little bit more environmentally friendly, more patriotic. Obviously, if the casino owners could have, they would have kept their neon on, but they don't want to get the backlash from the press, so they take their lights out. Now, eventually, we do get the lights back, but by this point, neon has taken on a very negative reputation. So this is Times Square in the 70s. If you actually notice the way in which neon is used, the types of things being advertised. It's a very gritty part of the city. It's also the red light district at this time, so neon becomes associated with urban decay and the fall of the city. And by the time that the embargo is lifted, Las Vegas doesn't want to be associated with that. The corporations are abandoning all semblance of neon. They want to go with something more streamlined, standard, clean, and they go with the whiteboard concept. One of the first changes we see is in the Stardust sign. You'll notice that yes, it is still a sign, but look at the fonts that they are using. The original Stardust sign did have a lot of personality, right? Something about it looks highly atomic and gooey. By the 70s, we've standardized it to Helvetica because it's easier to read and it goes more in line with a standard company attitude. But what really ends up happening to the majority of signs is they lose all of their aluminum, all of their neon, all of their colors, and they go to what we call whiteboards. So whiteboards are backlit plastic pieces where you can just switch out the letters. And the idea is that by getting rid of our neon, we are being more environmentally conscious. However, as you can probably guess it, these are just as bad for the environment because these have to be backlit. And they're not precisely using LEDs or anything, environmentally friendly. They're using fluorescents, the same type of stuff that the neon is using. So they actually end up draining even more energy. But Las Vegas is trying to make themselves look like they're doing the opposite. Now, working on these signs is also very dangerous work. Yesco, the Young Electric Sign Company of Las Vegas, the one that's designed all the major ones, does send its workers out to repair them. So this is a very, very tiny example, but look at the size of just one of the letters on the Stardust. And again, I will remind you that the letters themselves were a very small portion of the sign itself. So a person is probably as big as a dingbat. So these little sparkly things are called dingbats. And they have to get up here and replace each little bulb, depending on what needs maintenance. They at this point do not have this technology, so they do have to use 100-foot flimsy ladders. It is hot, there's high winds out here, so a lot of people do fall off when they're working on there. They do break a lot of bones in their body. And then at night, they have to have someone patrolling the streets for 2 hours just up and down the strip continuously, monitoring where are the light bulbs going out, what parts of the whiteboards look a little bit dimmer so that they can send their crews out to fix that. Now the whiteboards are actually even more dangerous than the surface neon because you have to access the light from inside. So now imagine it is 100, 110 degrees outside on a summer night. You have to go inside of a sign that's probably 150 degrees to change out the bulbs. They are burning hot, and you're again on a little flimsy ladder, so it's a very dangerous job to do regardless of it being neon or whiteboards. But once again, the corporations are telling us this is now a safer practice, when in reality it is not. So the sign begins to be replaced with what we call the porte cochere. Those begin to get more elaborate. Those are the ones that begin to bring light bulbs and these flashy patterns in order to make themselves a little bit more branded, because the sign itself is starting to become a secondary thing to the building. So the architects are really fighting back, and they're going, if you want something flashy, I'll make it for you, but you don't have to go out there and hire a sign maker to pasteurize my design. At least that's the way they thought. So Silverbird gets its own porte cochere. It is all completely covered in glass and mirror. But even as ostentatious as that is, you can see it's really no match for the power of the vertical sign. So it's really not the best deal for the casinos. On top of that, Vegas is facing even more issues in the 70s. In 78, Atlantic City in New Jersey now breaks the monopoly that Nevada has on gambling, so they open their own strip. And as you can see, they have something that Las Vegas will never be able to compete with, which is of course a waterfront. So now they are offering a beach. They now become a little bit more family oriented. So now you can bring your family over for vacation, you can game. You have this all in one actual resort experience. Vegas is meanwhile beginning to take on a negative reputation, and it's called the retirement home for fading stars. So Elvis at this point is not doing all that well. We also have Liberace, and they're kind of these retired stars, right? No one really watches them anymore unless they're the older folk who grew up with them. And so Las Vegas is struggling to really bring in new talent that the younger generations want to see. On top of that, the 70s also sees that the mob or the syndicates that are running all these casinos, because despite being owned by corporations, a lot of their business ghost partners are still the mob members, so they're still heavily involved as corporate as Vegas is. They break their purity code and now they start killing people in the city. So the city now becomes associated with danger. We do see that the Culinary Union leader is assassinated, he's murdered, and then he's dumped out in the desert. They find his body and it is tied back to the mob, the Chicago one to be exact. And finally, we do have two major fires, the deadliest in Nevada history. It does take, I believe, 87 lives, if I'm not mistaken. So this is the MGM Grand, and I did tell you, because they were building it fast, they were designing it on the spot, they managed to bribe the commissioners and the people that looked over the plans. They didn't build it with sprinklers. The only place that had sprinklers were the rooms up here for the people that were wealthier, and the gaming room for the actual high rollers. So it's kind of what happened on the Titanic. They really only took care of their wealthy patrons. Everyone else was just kind of left to die, suffocating on the smoke, because they used very cheap materials, and because of the fact that most of it was plastic. Fire spread at about 15 feet per second, so it completely lit a blaze in 6 minutes. And it wasn't necessarily the fire that took the lives, it was the smoke, right? If you breathe in smoke from like wood, that's bad. You can recover from that though, but if you breathe in a fume from a plastic, that's straight up toxic and it kills you on the spot. So that is what most people passed away from in this tragedy. Oh my gosh. My ad blocker, YouTube is telling me I can't use an ad blocker anymore, so we're just gonna have to deal with a couple of those.
On November 21st, 1980, a refrigerated pastry display in any restaurant set on fire. It was not correctly secured, which led to vibrations corroding the electrical wires and ignited. The fire would be the deadliest disaster in Nevada history and the third deadliest hotel fire. The fire spread to the casino, taking just 6 minutes from when the fire was found until the entire casino floor was aflame and erupted into a giant fireball. Hotel fire safety regulations were lax at the time of the hotel's creation. The first 2 floors and top floor, a high roller level, were the only floors within sprinklers. The casino and restaurant did not have a system, as they were exempt from rules requiring sprinklers in areas that would be open 24 hours a day. The deli was closed at the time the fire began.
Alright, so you guys get the idea? By cutting corners, these corporations ultimately made a bunch of boxes that were highly unsafe, made of very toxic materials, and it goes to show the drive for profits was bigger than anything else. It was bigger than personality, it was bigger than safety for its people, etc. So this is the aftermath of that fire. So that's Bally's today. Bally's or Horseshoe or whatever it's called is rumored to be haunted because of that, especially the stairwells and the elevator shafts where most people got trapped. So a lot of the service will not take a certain elevator because they say that there are ghosts inside of there. And it is part of why MGM Grand's completely built on the other side of the strip in order to kind of clean away this memory of what happened in 1980. Some people also, in order to escape the fire, just kind of threw themselves off of the building itself, so that added to the death toll a little bit more. Hilton, the Hilton International, or the Westgate, also has a fire. This one is done on purpose by a busboy. He was trying to get back at the corporation, and he actually ended up killing 8 people, so he does get a life in jail. So we do have 2 fires, and all of this, with the retiring stars, the fact that Atlantic City's there, the mob is killing people, ultimately makes Las Vegas a sort of backwater place to be. Like, you really have to be a degenerate to be in Vegas in the late 70s and 80s. Anyone in the right mind that has money or influence is not going to be coming here. So in the corporate modern era, we do learn 4 more things. Number 1, we see that the casino as a singular tower complex is a positive idea because now we're able to get people onto the casino floor a lot quicker. Number 2, we see the replacement of neon with whiteboards, which we know are not more environmentally friendly. They have a less of a personality. Number 3, we see the battle of the porte cocheres, the architect's revenge, trying to bring back personality through the car entrance, but again, it cannot really compete with the verticality of that sign. And number 4, the dangers of taking on a conservative or standard approach to Las Vegas. We are inherently a city that is driven by competition, by innovation, by doing the next big thing. So when you bring in the corporations and they're trying to do the same thing that they've done in every other city, there's really no reason to come here anymore. And so they kind of led to the downfall of Vegas for the time being. It's kind of a depressing time in Vegas history. Fortunately, we do have a renaissance. So from 85 to 95, we have what we call the Disneyland era of the 90s. So we're going to start by talking about what's happening in the US at this time. So the demographics are beginning to shift. Purple is baby boomers. You'll notice that in the late 80s, early 90s, they are the single largest demographic of working age, meaning that casinos who study these are now trying to target them instead of their parents and their grandparents. So now we have to find a way to bring in the baby boomers who largely are having, big families, they have more disposable income. How do we bring them into a city that has such a negative reputation? At the same time, we are recovering from a recession. So in the early 80s, when Reagan first came into office, there was a small recession that eventually got cleaned up. And you can see that by the end of the 1980s, we're able to fully recover from it. At the same time, we have an Airline Deregulation Act signed by President Carter, which just means that it's now not the government setting airfare, it is the individual companies. So now that different airlines can change the price of a ticket, meaning that the prices are driven down because there is more competition, meaning that it is now more accessible for the average middle-class American, aka the baby boomers at this time, to be able to travel. And Disney at this time is the largest entertainment company in the world. So you can see that in the late 1980s, and then by the time we get to the 2000s, they are absolutely skyrocketing. And even today, they're probably the biggest entertainment industry out there. For my Disney fans in here, what happens to Disney in the 1990s? What is that era known as? Not yet. So Disney, like Vegas, goes through eras. There's like a golden era, a silver era. So the 90s are known as a certain something era. Does anyone know? The Renaissance era. So the Renaissance era is where all the iconic 90s films comes from. So again, Disney is growing. They are having a massive influence, not just on animation and on entertainment, but they're also having a lot of influence in American cities. So there's this phenomenon in the 90s called the Disneyfication of things. And essentially what it is, it's the cleaning up of the image of the city. We are now making it family friendly and scrubbing it clean of anything that looks a little bit more adult themed. So once again, this is Times Square in the 80s, and you can see, topless, girls, videos, that sort of stuff is going on. By the time it's the 1990s, we bring in the iconic billboards, and notice we are now advertising corporate companies, musicals, things that kids would be okay with seeing out in public. And there's a lot of public critique about this, about the cleanup of the city, and catering to children and blah, blah, blah. For us, it just makes sense, because that's kind of what we've seen our whole lives, or at least I have. But at the time, there was a lot of outcry from people in the inner cities. Vegas decides it now needs to start its own Disneyfication process, and it starts by changing the term gambling to gaming. So now that it's not gambling, we stop associating Las Vegas with, these older men that are gambling, single, drinking, smoking a cigar in a low, hazy lounge. Now that it's gaming, you can flip things around, and now you could say that a family, right, the parents, the mom and dad, can bring their kids over, they can sit down for a game or two, but that doesn't make them gamblers. That just makes them sit down and play a casual game. But it's really the same concept. Now, Circus Circus, interestingly, is one of the only casinos to survive the 70s, the 80s, the entirety of the early 80s recession, and so all the other corporate casinos that are trying to just be higher, and more classy looking, they come to Circus Circus and they're like, what are you guys doing to make you guys have consistent profits? And Circus Circus is like, we've done the same thing we've always done. We just go for the middle class because they're always going to be available to come. They can't necessarily afford to go to all these fancy destinations. So Circus Circus was still going really strong. And so all of these things combined, right, the baby boomers, the family approach, Disneyfication, the middle class growing, eventually lead to the Disneyland era of Las Vegas. And the Disneyland era sees that we pay a lot more attention to the guest experience now. We invite psychologists, environmental consultants. We hire people to tell us what do people like to do, how can we train them to gamble, how can we train them to actually spend money. So it's kind of the complete opposite of the corporate modern era, where now we are actually bringing in even more people for the design team. So if you've ever waited in an elevator lobby or even inside the elevator itself, there's a couple of techniques that casinos use in order to make us feel like time is going a little slower. Can anyone guess what it is in this image? There's a chair so you can sit, but there's something else in here.
Is it the dining thing in the back?
No.
Chairs?
Yes. What do we like to look at more than anything else? Ourselves. So casinos bring in mirrors because this way, if your elevators are taking too long, you're not going to notice. By the time the elevator is there, you're probably going to think no time has gone by because you're so busy looking at yourself. The elevators themselves also have a lot of mirrors so that you don't feel the time pass as you're going up and down. And all of this is because psychologists are now invited into the designs. What they also start doing is they start hiring sociologists to pay attention to what Americans are into at the time. So during the Gulf War in the 90s, people are feeling quite patriotic, and what they realize is that if they can theme their slot machines, they can actually make a lot more money depending on what people are feeling at the time. So Americans, Stars and Stripes, red, white, and blue ones are quite popular in the 90s. Whenever we're at war, that's what's going to happen. And even today, we can see that they've taken this a step further. All of this is digital. You can quickly change out the theme if you wanted to. So you can imagine during Super Bowl weekends, a lot of them are going to change to look like this because we know that people are out to party, they're probably going to watch the game. They're just going to be more inclined to sit down at one of these instead of at another one. And if you look at the dining experiences as well, right? If you have a dim sum place, a buffet place, look at the machines that they place next to them. They're usually going to be like Lucky Dragon, Golden Dragon, something that is Asian themed. If you have a Mexican restaurant, you're going to have like the Aztec God, Montezuma's Revenge type of gambling machines. So we start seeing that the theme of not just the casino, but the machine itself is going to be quite important starting in the 90s. Now, in the 90s, it's not Kerkorian, but it's Steve Wynn that is going to be driving a lot of the innovation that happens. Steve Wynn is originally from Maryland. He has a family business in a bingo parlor, but he starts acquiring shares, and by the time he's 31, he owns the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas. Now, when he gets here, he starts proposing major changes, and I'm showing you Golden Nugget even though it's off the strip to give you an idea of what he's trying to do. So at night, we do have the standard bullnose. They haven't really changed too much since the 60s. And though it is very flashy, every other casino is essentially doing the same thing. But Wynn's problem is during the day. The neon really looks kind of ugly. You can see where you had, the bulbs go out. There's little burn marks on the aluminum. And it really just looks run down, rusty. It doesn't really look all that nice during the day. And Wynn is a guy that likes class. So he decides to redo the facades entirely. And this is the Golden Nugget we know today. So when you look at that next to all of the neon in the downtown, immediately you know Golden Nugget is not the same as all the other casinos. It is the classier option. He brings in boutique awnings to give a sense of, Miami seaside class. And then you can see, though he has little light bulbs here and there, they are meticulously placed, and that alone just gives more prominence to the corner entry. During the day, it looks just as classy because you don't have a bunch of neon and infrastructure ruining the view. You actually just have a really nice facade. As the sun shines down on it, the idea was it's going to reflect and it's going to be the brightest of all the facades when you compare it to the ugly neon ones. And notice that the way the lights are placed are very architectural, right? They are placed in order to emphasize the lines that are already there. The neon is hidden underneath these, so you don't necessarily see all of the bulbs and all of the magic that goes to making this come alive. He redoes the interiors. This was the Golden Nugget in the 70s and 80s. Again, you'll notice that there are no children, and there's hardly any women. It's mostly older men, and that demographic isn't really gambling or going out anymore. So Wynn decides we need to retrofit this to fit a new image. So you can see they make it look larger by adding mirrors, also so dealers can look at people that are cheating. They add lights on top, they illuminate the ceilings, they try to make it feel bigger than it is. And notably, he also looks into biophilia. So you didn't know, Las Vegas does have a lot of biophilia going on inside of the casino floor, because of the fact that being close to nature restores your minds. If you are gambling with no breaks in between, if you have a tree next to you, it's going to make you gamble longer just because the human brain is attracted to nature and it feels more stimulated when it's next to greenery. So the Golden Nugget is arranged around the pool like this. And I'm showing you this because I want you to see on the interior, what Wynn does is he places all of the major restaurants right next to there. So now, if you have a family and you want to go out to eat somewhere nice, you can do that, and you can have a nice view, and it doesn't feel like you're in a low, smoky den with a bunch of, degenerate gamblers. Then on the other hand, he adds more slot machines around the daylight because he noticed that, contrary to popular belief, when you put these next to daylight, those are the machines that are going to generate the most money. Because everyone, whether we know it or not, is attracted to nature. Now, after all this, he eventually gets a bunch of loans, he pairs up with Circus Circus, he gets all of the money, he acquires $630 million, 10 times what Kerkorian had acquired in the 70s, and he proposes the Grand Barrage. I'm gonna show you the ad for the Mirage just because it's kind of funny.
So what do you think? About what? About what? Have you ever seen a resort this beautiful in your whole life? This tropical lagoon? Oh, it's great. It's great. Look, those are 50-foot palm trees. They're big. Big palm trees. Nothing like it in Las Vegas. Yeah, you're right. Nothing. Look up. What? The pool. Fantasy and reality. When a mirage appears on the Las Vegas Strip. And at the house there.
Right, so you can see where the name comes from. It is a mirage in the desert. And it's everything that the desert is not, right? So it has a water fountain. And he invests $30 million into the volcano alone because he knows that if you bring people into the front, right, if you can somehow hook them on with free entertainment, then the people are going to be more willing to go into your property. Now, in order to make this happen, he does hire a whole team, right? We have landscape architects, we have people that work with pyrotechnics, we have engineers, we have people that are sculptors. This whole thing takes a lot of time, and you can see all of the infrastructure that runs underneath it in order to make the water run white, because originally it just kind of flowed on and it was clear. So to make it run white and look like these, tropical rapids, it does flow at a rate of 128 gallons per minute. So not very environmentally friendly, but that's kind of what you have to do if you want to create a spectacle out in the desert. By the way, when you guys go to Dr. Chef, there's going to be a session that tells you exactly how they built the volcano. So if you're interested in that, that is one of the sessions that is available. Now, some of the magic to make this come alive, it did have steam machines to make the smoke, but because the steam and then all of the fire that was coming out smelled like sulfur, they also had pina colada scents come out into the audience. So it smelled like you were in this, tropical paradise. And because our noses are the ones that are the most nostalgic scent or sense of all, when you inject the scent into a casino, it makes you want to come back anytime you smell that. It reminds you of the good times you had there. We also see the sidewalk gets a whole lot bigger. So a standard sidewalk is about 5 feet. Wynn decides to push it to around 40 feet because he knows that this is not going to be just a sidewalk. It is now a place for the audience to watch a show. And so the whole casino is essentially a giant mousetrap where, yes, you're going to be watching free entertainment, but ultimately the people watching free entertainment are going to funnel into the casino itself to actually spend their money inside of there. And he does add this huge dome right here where he has another form of a mirage, right? A tropical paradise that would be impossible to have out in the desert. And what we see are even more techniques. So again, we see the Disneyfication, the idea of bringing in a lot of consultants to create an illusion for people. The power of storytelling is very evident to Wynn at this time. He's seeing that Disney's not making their money because their animations are better than anyone else's. It's because they can tell stories that resonate with people. And so in order to create this, beautiful landscape with no bugs, they have what we call mummified trees. So they bring in trees that are dead, they then twist them, they add a structure so that they won't fall over, and they glue fake leaves onto there. So all of the taller trees you see in the back are not real. They do put real plants out in the front so that you're inclined to think that the whole thing is natural, so that you smell something. And then we have a signature scent throughout the whole casino so that once again, when you smell that, your memory will be triggered and you'll want to come back. This is usually the type of plant we get in a casino. It is a philodendron, which is a little group of different types of plants. If you look at the older casinos, you'll notice that this is all they can manage to have because these don't require daylight. But Wynn expands the amount of plants you can actually have because he brings in real daylight. So now you can have real plants, more exotic plants, more of a variety. And what this does, you'll notice the demographic is beginning to shift, and now we have children, but most importantly, we have women. So women become Wynn's target audience. He knows that if you bring in women, not necessarily, showgirl women, but just regular run-of-the-mill tourist women, you'll also bring in their husbands, you'll bring in their children, you'll bring in more family ties. Another technique, if you put an aquarium behind the reception desk, you'll lose track of time. You're not going to be worried about the big line in front of you because you can be looking at the fishes behind the reception desk. After they closed, someone went in and took pictures. I went on the last day that they were open. It was kind of sad. You could see how they were unplugging everything. But you can see that the big open atrium lets in daylight to the gambling floor itself. And so now the slot machines that were located here were the ones making the most money. And the casino can profit off of that by making the people right here less likely to win. So they just generate more money off of those slots. He also diversified entertainment, so we get the idea of magicians coming to Vegas, things that kids are able to watch with their parents. We have the dolphin habitat arrive. So he's telling the story of, a tropical mirage in the middle of a desert, not just by calling it the mirage or making the building thematic, but also by bringing in forms of entertainment so that people can play along in this story. And we also have a Cirque show eventually join us. And so now, people that come to Vegas are not gamblers, they're just families. And again, parents might happen to play a game or two, but they are not gamblers. Or at least that's like what they like to tell themselves. Now, they're getting really good at reading what Americans are into, and one of the things that they find is around 7 million Americans per year visit Ren fairs. So they start thinking, how can we begin to profit off of this interest in medieval times? And so we get the birth of the Excalibur, the next one in the Disneyland era. Now you'll notice that it's not just because of Ren fairs, it is most obviously because it looks like the Disney castle, and that's what people are into at the time. So they're borrowing the concept without calling themselves Disney because they'd have a lawsuit on their hands. And because of that, they theme themselves around Arthurian legends, not fairy tales. The front of it did have a dragon show, so you'd have the dragon come out from here. He would battle Merlin in the front. It's been a long time since they've done this show. But if you go out and you look at the drawbridge, you'll notice that there's a little hut down there. That's where Merlin would come out of, and then the dragon would come out of here. I'll show you really quickly. I'll speed it up.
Jermaine struggled for years with dental issues before finally finding Nubia. Listen to what he wanted most after his smile makeover.
Okay. So that's where the dragon would come out of. Very, very slow. It was all animatronics. Then he would come out here and he would start fighting Merlin, and people are on the drawbridge watching all this. And so by the time the show is over, you're able to have all the people come into the castle and continue to play along as part of the Ren fair. Inside of the Excalibur itself, you did have jesters and knights and wizards and people role-playing in order to immerse you more into the story. But these people were not allowed onto the gambling floor because, if you recall, when the circus allowed animals and acrobats and other things to happen on the gaming floor, they didn't make profits. So these people are really around the entry, they're on the peacock alleys, but they're not on the actual gambling floor in order to make sure that people are still spending their money there. Caesars picks up on this. They open up their forum shops. So you'll notice that the forum shops, the way that the architecture is articulated is not straight small like most are. They instead have a series of nodes, and then the way in which you approach them, you can't necessarily see where you're going. And what they do is that at each one of these nodes, they create a part of a storyline. So it kind of lures you in by saying, hey, we have a free show in 3 parts. If you just kind of come all the way to the back and watch all 3 acts, you'll have a full free show to yourself. When in reality, they were trying to get you into shop, and it became the most lucrative mall in the United States for most of the 90s and the 2000s. And so when you go inside of there and you see all these fountains, that's where the shows used to take place. I believe that the Atlantis one, because it's animatronics, is the only one that remains today. It's all the way in the back if you still want to go to see it. But this is what drove people in to shop. And so now that other people are looking at Caesars and they're seeing that Caesars is using themes and they're doing it in order to bring in families who want to shop and not game, they also begin adding in their own shopping areas. So that's why almost every casino today has like a mini shopping mall inside of it. Talk about the Luxor, and then hopefully we can wrap it up there. Luxor opens up next. You'll notice that the location of the Luxor is right next to the airport, which was a problem. It is a dark, glass pyramid, and the only thing telling us it exists is that light beam on top. So they did require Luxor to bring these in, which is kind of why it looks like a airport runway, in order to clearly delineate where the pyramid was for any of the pilots coming in. But the concept of the Luxor, very similarly, is also immersive. So the story is that you're going into an old pyramid and you're in an excavation site and you're going to go discover things. They create a faux city inside of there. They create pieces of Cairo. They also used to have like a boat ride. I think it was themed around Cleopatra. So you were going down the Nile and discovering things. Now, unfortunately, the Luxor didn't really do all that well because of the reputation it picked up. For one, it's very, very dark. There's no daylight inside of here because the top has to be used for the big, flashing light piece. So you can't really open this up to daylight. The rooms are all located around it, so you also don't get daylight through there. And it also, unfortunately, became a popular suicide spot because you do have open balconies. And you can imagine, one thing is falling out of a building onto the sidewalk, another thing is falling onto a casino floor where families are walking with their children. So a lot of those were covered up in the 90s, which is why we don't hear about it a lot. And then they also began to get all these urban myths about hauntings, and they're bringing in mummies, and mummies are getting their revenge on the people. So even today, Luxor kind of has a city reputation going on, more or less. And then we have the Treasure Island. We've got a couple more minutes, I'm going to try to get through it. Treasure Island, also divided by wind. The idea of Treasure Island is, if the Mirage is the high rollers, Treasure Island will be more of our middle class. So it's essentially Caesars and Circus Circus all over again. And in the same way that Caesars and the Mirage are a little bit more luxurious, they have more vague themes, Circus Circus and Treasure Island are going to be more obvious. And because Pirates of the Caribbean, Peter Pan, all of these were taking off, the Disney Vacation, blah, 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 blah. They decided that Pirates would be a really great theme for this resort over here to play off of the Mirage. Now, if you're new to Vegas or you don't remember, there used to be that pirate show. This used to come out all the way from out here. So the old facade didn't used to include this big Walgreens out in the corner. It instead used to have a pirate cove out there. So if you go back in time to like 2011, that's where the ship would come out of. That was the pirate cove. You can see they have a skull. This would come out on the rails that we see right here. And then they simulate a pirate ship fight so that the kids would ask their parents to bring them on here. This show alone would bring around 4,000 to 8,000 people at its height. And then of those 4,000 to 8,000, you would funnel in 2,000 to 5,000 people right into the casino floor because of it. Treasure Island does infringe on the setback of the building. It really should be further back, but Wynn doesn't have the space to do that. So instead, he proposes to the city, I'll keep the sidewalk, but I'll make it into private property. So if you ever walk on this boardwalk, you're actually in the actual Treasure Island itself, and you'll notice that the real sidewalk is still down here, but no one really uses that. And so by doing that, he's funneling even more people in, because you can't really get off of it until you get all the way to the end over here. He creates a faux village over here. Because the building is so close to you compared to the other properties, you get a looming factor, which is essentially when you feel like the tower is so tall it's coming on top of you. And so he creates a village more to human scale in the front in order to create a backdrop for the show, but also to combat that feeling. There's the pirate ship itself. I'll show you guys a short clip from it. They then shoot back at the pirate ship, and they simulate the whole sinking, so you'll notice it starts going down. They do have machines underneath the water to create all of the waves in order to hide the rails, and then you can see the crew members jump off of the ship, so they have to hide the crew members as they swim underneath and go back into their lockers. what it used to look like. Then at the end, the pirates would say, come celebrate inside with us at the Treasure Island. So we'll pick up right there next time. If you have any questions, please let me know. I will be outside.